This is Plympton, Massachusetts, a community of cranberry bogs and cornfields. But the most important part of Plympton has always been the people. In the next hour, we will meet some folks from the past and many that live in Plympton today.
I'm Jonathan Shaw, and I live on Lake Street here in Plympton. The first people of Plympton, the native Wampanoags, left behind only traces of themselves. Smooth, perfectly round stones used for grinding or gaming. I've found some in my own backyard. And arrowheads, of course, which people find up on Cato's Ridge, so-called, between Ring Road and County Road. Now, Wamsutta, the eldest son of Massasoit, used the area as a hunting ground. We know that because it was in Halifax, which was then part of Plympton, that he was found when he needed to be taken to Plymouth to answer some charges. Before it was a town, Plympton was known as the Western Precinct of Plymouth. And it encompassed all of present-day Plympton and Carver, much of Halifax, and part of Kingston and Middleborough. Grants of land to the colonial settlers in this area began in 1637, but the first homes were built at Lakenham in the 1660s along the Indian Trail that connected Plymouth to the Indian village at Nemasket in Middleborough. Lakenham today is on Old Route 44. There's a town green there in North Carver. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, who in 1652, as a young man of about 21, had met Usamequin and Wamsutta when they were better known as Massasoit and Alexander, as a witness to a land transaction between them and William Bradford. He settled at Lakenham before 1661 when he was granted additional land next to his house there, and that's from a court record. Later land grants in the 1660s were made to him on the condition that they not be prejudicial to the neighborhood, indicating that others had settled there as well. Whether he was the first or not is not really known. And these were the prime areas for settlement because they were either Indian paths or they were rivers or ponds, places where people could water their cattle, or that have water for their crops, and that had been cleared by the Indians in many cases. The real settlement, the real permanent settlement of Plympton didn't happen until after King Philip's War. Middleborough, of course, was burned and abandoned in 1675. Bridgewater was attacked in 1676. These are both towns that were further west. And in Plympton, in the part that's now known as Halifax, 100 warriors came and destroyed 11 houses and 5 barns. There's no record of anything like that happening in present-day Plympton or Carver, but it's also hard to believe that people just stayed in their homes in this sort of remote area when there were warriors going around and burning the houses.
One local historian, John Henry, visited the Historical Society recently and introduces us to a famous Plymptonian, Deacon Lewis Bradford.
Hello, my name is John Henry. I've had the pleasure of living in Plympton for 25 years. This is a nice little town of about 2,000 people that is the closest that you can come to Vermont, which is where I am from. I'm here today at the beautiful historical building in downtown Plympton to talk about the Deacon Lewis Bradford. Deacon Bradford was born March 20th, 1768. He died unmarried on August 10th, 1851, after he fell off a wagon at the close of church services. He was the son of Levi Bradford and Elizabeth Lewis. The reason that the Deacon is so important to Plympton is he probably left more paperwork than anybody else. He was the greatest archivist in the history of Plympton. He also probably was around when this building was built and probably was in and out of it many times. He was a school teacher. He was the town clerk for several years, from 1812 to 1851. He was the church deacon from 1814 to 1830. He was an assessor. He was representative to the legislature in Boston, and is justice of the peace. So he literally was one of the original founding fathers of the town of Plympton.
Cindy Bloomquist also visited the Plympton Historical Society and speaks about her involvement with the Ladies' Sewing Circle.
Hi, my name is Cindy Bloomquist. I've been in Plympton since about 1980, and I am currently the co-president of the Ladies' Sewing Circle, and I guess we're here to talk about the Sewing Circle today. The Sewing Circle started back in 1849, and it's gone through a number of changes. Being here through the Historical Society, I've learned a number of things so far. The Sewing Circle, over the years, apparently has done many of the same things that they've always done. It started out, actually, we have something dated as far back as 1827, which is the Plympton Gentlemen's and Ladies' Society. That changed back in 1849 when the Ladies' Sewing Circle began. It was the Ladies' Memorial Association. It did change for a short period of time to Ladies' Soldier Memorial Association because they did an awful lot of fundraising to help out. I know they erected a soldier in the center of town, and they did a lot of fundraising in an effort to put up that particular statue. The Ladies' Sewing Circle years ago, I know, made bandages, and they were used during wartime. They were sent to the leper colonies to be used. They've done a lot of community things. One of the very first minutes of the Sewing Circle meeting I got a copy of, and several things that might interest people would be, it says here, Now that we have changed from a missionary society to a sewing circle to help support the church, we must settle down and try to get some sewing done. We have good officers and a fine start. Mrs. Ira Parker will be a good president, with Betsy Hammond as vice president and Lavinia Taylor secretary and treasurer.
Again at the Plympton Historical Society building, a beautifully crafted quilt is on display, featuring many prominent Plympton locations from past to present. The Plympton Web Committee invited the townspeople to bring in their old photos and documents for scanning so that they could be preserved and shared online. Many brought their attic or basement treasures, yielding over 300 items. The chairman of the Web Committee is Max West, who was extremely pleased with the results.
My name is Max West, and I'm chairman of the Town Web Development and Maintenance Committee. And some time ago, we decided that we wanted to do some things to improve the town website. And one of the ideas we had was to collect historical images from people in the town. We thought there were a lot of people that had lived here a long time and had pictures, letters, objects in their attics and their barns that might be lost over time. And we wanted to capture those. And what we decided to do was have a digital scanning event where people could bring in the images and documents and such. We'd scan them and create digital images and collect information about the images, the history that they recall about the people in the pictures, the events that were going on at the time, collect all that information and put the data about the event or the people along with the image up on the town website.
In this next segment are some highlights of the many documents brought in during the fall of 2006. During the last 2 years, dozens of oral histories have been conducted in various locations around town: at the church, at the Historical Society, at the Community Television Studio, and at the homes of Tercentennial Committee members Elizabeth Westley and Walter Peterson. More than 20 hours of videotape were recorded. All will be preserved on DVDs and archived at the Historical Society and the Town Library. Highlights of those oral histories will be presented now and throughout this presentation. Let's begin at the home of Elizabeth Westley.
I wasn't born in Plympton. I was born in Charlestown, like Jean. Jean is my aunt. And then we moved to Plympton. Oh, I must have been in the 3rd grade. And we lived down in Harrop's Corner. And we went to the Shaw School down there. But I think it's a house now. It is a house now on the corner of 106 and Main Street.
Is that always where it was?
Yes, yes. And we used to have to, the boys used to have to light the fire in the morning. There was a hot belly stove up back and benches around it. So we could sit around there till, in the winter, till it got warm. And then we had Mrs. McCarthy for our teacher. And she taught the 3 grades. And we had outhouses. We had no indoor plumbing. And also in the winter, we didn't have thermoses, we had jars of cocoa. And she would put a pan on the top of the potbelly stove with water in it. And we'd put our jars in there and heat up our cocoa for lunch. And then we went, as Jean said, I followed her. We went up to the town hall up here. And then we went over to the new school, and we were the first class to graduate from the new school in 1937. But we had a lot of fun. I mean, we made our own fun, but everybody was together. I mean, we were all poor, but we didn't know it because everybody was poor.
I was born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I'm a 9th generation Wright from Plympton. I'm descended from Richard Wright, who was the son of Hester Cook, who was the daughter of Francis Cook, who came over on the Mayflower. But I'm also related to all the old families in Plympton, the Souls, the Bradfords, the Standishes, and Plympton was a very small community, and my father's family never left Plympton except when they got older and wandered off to Brockton or Whitman or Abington. But they had the whole family lived in Plympton. There were many, many Wrights. My grandfather had the property adjoining our property on one side of Crossway on Maple Street, and my Alice Vickery, who was at the end of Maple Street on Palmer Road, was a Holmes, and the Holmes family were related to us. And my uncle Elmer Shaw and Elmer Adam Wright had property behind our house that extended down to the Johnson's house, behind the Johnson's house on Maple Street.
And what did your father do?
Well, he was a milkman for Hood Milk Company in Charlestown. And then when he came out here, he became a chicken farmer. My mother died in 1936, so I was in the 8th grade. And I remember when I graduated from high school, one of the ladies in town made my dotted Swiss dress for my graduation. I'll never forget that.
When I went to church, because I was married in the church here, and at one of our anniversaries, we thought we should go to church, and we did. There wasn't a soul in the church that I recognized from my past.
No.
Not one single. When I went to church, and my husband and I were married in the church. Crum Jordan, the minister at that time, was a good friend, and I decided I wanted to be married by him, and I loved Plympton, so this is where I got married.
He married Kenny and I.
And there's nobody left of the old families that I knew. but it was still a nice experience to go and relive that time. I got married in 1942.
Okay, start.
My name is Paul Hadger. I'm a third generation cranberry grower. My grandparents came to this country from Finland in 1903, settled in Carver in 1908, and the farm that they bought in Carver had a small cranberry bog on it, and they were involved with the cultivation of cranberries, working for other cranberry growers and building cranberry bog and whatnot his whole life. My father and my uncles acquired the bogs and worked for other people, and my father used to contract setting cranberry vines on many bogs, and many of them were in Plympton also, mostly during the 40s and early 50s. But they expanded their acreage, and then my brothers, I was born in 1953, and along with my older brother, my younger brother, my sister has a part interest, we've taken over all of the family bogs, and we have our own bogs also, with approximately 320 acres, and of that, there's perhaps 150 acres of that is in Plympton. Family first came to Plympton in 1959. They acquired Paul Thompson Bog on Cedar Street, which was built in 1910, in 1 year entirely by hand. And talking to old timers that knew the people that actually worked on the bog, they claimed that there'd be an army of men coming to work in the morning, a quarter of a mile long, walking to work every day, and they built the whole property, which was 32 acres of bog, a huge screen house, a very large house, 2 garages, 2 pump houses, 2 long canals, all built entirely by hand with a pickaxe, a shovel, pry bars. It was done in 1 year by hand labor.
My name is Ron Drollet, and I first come to Plympton in 1957. And unlike Paul, I'm a first-generation cranberry grower. And I was in the flower business, and my family was in the flower business in Braintree, and that's how I kind of got involved in cranberries, the fascination of growing them and the flowers and the birds and the bees. The first bog I built, the first bog that I owned, excuse me, was right up the street from here, about 300 or 500 feet, the Main Street bog. And I bought that from a fellow, Chet Rogers, who lived on Ring Road a couple houses down. I bought that in 1986. I sold it in 1986. I bought it in 1984, and I ran it for a couple of years. And then I decided that I wanted to get a little bit larger, so I bought some land off of Churchill Road, and I built 26 acres of bog. The first experience that I ever had in the cranberry business was in 1957 when I helped my father and Henry Shaw, who was an old-timer in Plympton here, pick the Wilkie Bog. And the Wilkie Bog, for any of you who may remember, was up where Halliday lithograft is right now. And that was a dry pick bog, and the cranberries went to Ocean Spray. And I was 50. Yeah, I was 15 at the time. And the difference between the different types, I just mentioned dry picking, the difference between the different types of picking, dry picking and wet picking. Back in 1957, the majority of cranberries were dry picked, and they were picked with a machine that went through the vines and had fingers on there and scooped up the cranberries, and they were dry, and they were mainly used for home cooking and the packaging, and at the same time used for juices, because that's the only process we really had. And then because of the intense labor forces needed and the expense of dry picking, they kind of converted to a lot of wet picking of cranberries, which you flood the bogs and you run a beater through there and you beat the cranberries off, and most people have seen that type of action. And those type of cranberries right now are used for cranberry sauce and concentrate for the juices, and the dry picked cranberries are used in the packaging for cooking and in odds and ends. In Plympton, there are about 500 acres of cranberry bogs today in the town of Plympton. I don't know what they were when things, a few years back, but I do know right now there's about 500 acres of cranberry bogs in Plympton, and there are about 1,200 acres of support land. And when I talk about support land, I'm talking about dikes and reservoirs and roadways around cranberry bogs.
Hey, I'm Joe Freitas. I'm selectman in Plympton. I was born and brought up in Plymouth, and my life is not anywhere near as exciting as the cranberry growers. But after graduating from Plymouth High School, I went to Stockbridge, University of Mass, 2-year agricultural school. Graduated there, went in the Army. Spent, after the Army, went 2 years. I went down the Cape for a year. Did some more farming with Mayo's Duck Farm. I ended up moving back to Plympton in 1956. And at the time, I think we were 750, 760 people back then. There were more people who lived in Plympton during the Civil War than lived in Plympton back in the 1960s, if you will. And, I had a lot of, as they're talking, I had a lot of interesting things that came to mind. When I moved into town, everyone knows the historic building as it is today, but it wasn't that way when I first moved into town. We had the downstairs with a couple of offices and the big floor with the wood stove and no ceiling. And we used to go in there on a Saturday, remove the wood stove, the Tommy Bowes, Parkers, May, Santos, be 8 or 9 of us. Remove the wood stove with all the piping that went along the ceiling, had to rehang it when we got through. And we played basketball in there on a Saturday.
Where was this, Joe?
At the Historical Society building, because there was no ceiling.
That's the town hall.
There was no ceiling, so we could play basketball in there. And no one ever said no. I don't know if we ever had permission, but no one ever said no. Because we always put the stove back the way it was and rehung it. And that was and we were 21, 22, or 23 years old at the time. And that was our Saturday activity.
I'm Jackie Freitas. I used to be Jackie Boyer. I grew up on the other side of town from Mary. And believe me, there was a bus to school because I lived 3 miles from it. And Silver Lake was 6 miles from school. Just before, I came in right after the 39 hurricane. So there were trees to play on. We had people my age were down at Arab's Corner. The house I grew up in is a framing shop now with the big barn. And all those houses are old houses on that corner. And we went up to school, which was 5 or 8 years old when I went to it, the front building, the front part of it. There were four classrooms on the top of the building, and there was a downstairs basement thing that we used for gym recess, and then on the side there was a little place where the mothers cooked, so we had hot lunches. We were ahead of our time with hot lunches. Some of the mothers, they started every year. We were there. We were the first class to go to Plymouth after the 6th grade. They had waited till after the 8th grade to go to Plymouth, but there were 2 grades in every classroom. You have 2 grades in every classroom. There was first and second in one room, and so on, all the way up. So there was an extra room that way. When we started, we went over to Plymouth. We went in the junior high, and at junior high time, there wasn't any reason to stay after school except if you didn't do your math. Some of us know about that. But high school, we were down at the other end, so we could take the bus to Kingston, and our mothers would just pick us up in Kingston.
I'm Mary Guidaboni. I was Mary Eldridge, and I moved here when I was 8 years old from Holbrook, Massachusetts. And I married the boy down the street on the Plympton-Middleborough border in 1954. And so that's why I'm Mary Guidaboni now, but I was Mary Eldridge when I arrived here in 1945.
Where did you live?
I lived in an 1802 house that was once called the D. White Hotel in the center of town. And it was very rustic. It had no bathroom or running water. Did have electricity, a minimal, a light bulb here and there, I think. And it hadn't been lived in for quite a while. So we had other guests besides the Eldridge family that lived there for a while. I think there are 13 rooms, 6 fireplaces, very old house. And of course, as children, we just thought it was a wonderful adventure. So we didn't mind all the inconveniences and the outhouse that was actually inside the shed. And we thought that was quite fascinating.